Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Bold Explorer reading of Narrowboat by LTC Rolt. Lovely to have you join me at 2 p.m. here. Oh, there it goes, telling me that I'm now live. Nice of you to join me. 2 p.m. here in the UK times, British summertime as it is. Lovely to see you, Mike Stevens and Steve G. Whatever was causing your show 7 hours, what happened on the number 10's YouTube? Hang on, I've got to reread that again. Hi Richard, whatever was causing you show 7 hours was happened. Yeah, everybody keeps telling me about this 7 hour thing. I think this is a problem in the BIOS on my computer that for some reason is different to the clock that I have here. We keep getting it. I don't understand why. I haven't had a chance to go into the BIOS and change the clock, but it keeps telling 7 hours. I don't understand. I don't see the 7 hours thing. I don't know where that comes from. I don't know how you see that. But anyway, it's just the way it is. When you see me live, I'm actually here. That's all I can say. Good afternoon to you, Adrian. Hello to you, lovely Julia. From sunny Birmingham on sea. On sea. Oh, marvellous. Yeah, Sussex by the Sea, Mike. Definitely Sussex by the Sea. We are going to be reading chapter 25, which is called Church Minshall. Minshall. We shall see what that's about. Unfortunately, again, I haven't had a chance to pre-read it because I was out again this morning. I've been trying to make some bread, kneading up some bread, and also I have been editing the video that I've been doing. My son and his girlfriend are in my kitchen making a lot of noise, which I hope is not coming over the microphone. They're watching something on some American nonsense on their laptop whilst they're sorting out their dinner. So apologies for any erroneous noises off screen. And a slurp. This 7 Hour You thing is a YouTube thing. It does it on all live streams. Oh, does it? Oh, okay. Everybody keeps telling me. It's like, I thought everybody knew by now that it always seems to say 7 hours. And does it actually say the word 7? Because everyone's very precise in how they tell me about it. It's not like I'm just 7 hours behind with the time. YouTuber says, I made rhubarb jam last night. Just need a slice of bread now. I better cook a loaf for you. Just a moment. I have got one that needs to be kneaded in about 20 minutes. But I've got to do my reading for an hour. So I'm hoping that it's not going to go... And then I can get it in the tin, and then I can light the essie and then get the oven to the right temperature and cook this bread. But I'm also hoping to do another loaf. I've got to finish my edit, do another loaf and get one for the lovely Julia because they have run out. So it's all go. Okay, let's crack on with this reading. Church Minshall, chapter 25. Church Minshall contained many excellent examples of the timber-framed house built in the genuine regional style, interspersed with a few substantial farms of brick, a medium which superseded timber as the local building material from the 18th century onwards. Only one cottage represented our enlightened age, a featureless block of raw brick and slate which replaced an older building demolished under the Slum Clearance Act, whose misapplication is the latest menace to the English village. This incongruous newcomer might have been transplanted from the suburbs of Crewe, a tawdry paper rose dropped in a bed of wild flowers, he says, having to very quickly scratch his eye. In a vale country such as this, where timber was once the most plentiful material, the tasks of the quarrymen and masons of the hills fell to woodmen and master carpenters. Their characteristic walls of timber framing, filled with lathe and plaster work, were the result, and their survival is an enduring tribute not only to the surpassing skill with which these local craftsmen wrought, but to their excellence of their materials. Because we have squandered the resources of forest and coppice with no thought of the future, such timber is no longer known, and our improvised erections of brick and stucco compare to our discredit with these old buildings, whose every ageless beam carries eloquent reproof. It seemed most fitting that the church and the inn should stand side by side in easy intimacy at the centre of the village, for these immemorial institutions are the core of rural life. Standing side by side, the living and the dead rested after their labours, for the gleaming and spotless taproom of the old Badger was not a stone's throw from the quiet churchyard. The two buildings seemed to regard each other with a benign tolerance of old age, the church tower overpeering the wall of the inn yard, and the inn windows gazing undismayed at the tombs of patrons long dead and gone, as one who would with calm acceptance say, "In the midst of life we are in death." In the church, the ancient parish register brought home. The ancient parish register brought home, as nothing else could, the strength and permanence of those ties which once held the countrymen to the land and to each other. This record, wonderfully preserved and legible, dated back to the 16th century. The same names recurring in birth, marriage, and death, generation after generation. To turn these pages of heavy vellum was to realise how, in the span of a lifetime, the bloodless revolution of the machine has loosed a bond which has survived plague, persecution, and war for at least 600 turbulent years. Most remarkable of all, the long-dead yeoman of Cheshire recorded here was one Thomas Dam of Leighton, who is written, "was buried of the 20th of February, 1649, being of age of 74. Assuming this entry to be correct, and there seems no good reason to doubt its authenticity, old Thomas Dam beats better-known Shropshire patriarch Thomas Parr of Glyn by 2 years. Both these stalwart countrymen attained great age under conditions which now we regard as barbaric, and without the aid of our much-advertised patent medicines, whose names are legion and whose popularity does not flatter our much-vaunted standard of living. We shall not see such years again until we have recovered sufficient sanity to simplify the pattern of our lives. From the churchyard gate, it was possible to look right and left along the village street, from the post office at one end to the smithy and wheelwright shop at the other. The postmistress, white-haired and benevolent, as such a personage should be, supplied the children with the same sticky, vivid sweets as their mothers and grandmothers had sucked when they too were young. On an evening when the menfolk repair to the Badger for a glass of mild, the housewives foregather in the post office for a gossip on the pretext of a stamp or half a pound of tea. Talking of tea. Delish. Thus, the music of the street was the clink of the blacksmith's hammer, and there was seldom a day when the pair of cart horses, patiently awaiting their turn, should be shod, or a new painted cart with scarlet shafts upreared. Oh, sorry. It didn't uprear. It was upreared, of course. So let me just read that again. Sorry about that. The music of the street was the clink of the blacksmith's hammer, and there was seldom a day when a pair of cart horses, patiently awaiting their turn to be shod, or a new painted cart with scarlet shafts upreared, were not to be seen standing outside his forge. For Mr. Egerton was the wheelwright as well as smith. The wind of increased motor taxation had swept much well-merited business into a shop redolent of paint and new hewn timber. Is it the wind or the wind? The wind of increased motor taxation had swept much well-merited business into a shop redolent of paint and new hewn timber. Gigs and traps, which local farmers had dragged from long years of retirement in dim and dusty cart sheds, shone bravely with new paint and varnish, their frames and shafts, wheel spokes and felloes, all delicately lined out to contribute to that rich and graceful finish which the invention of the cellulose spray gun has blown into the past. One gig bore proudly a hand-painted crest, proof positive that the hand of the craftsman has lost nothing of its cunning. Of the several institutions that contributed to that self-sufficient and corporate whole of village life, the mill was among the most important. But because the farmer no longer brings his corn to be ground, or the cottager his humble gleanings, it has generally suffered eclipse of recent years. Yet we discover that the waters of the Weaver still turn the wheels of Minshall Hill. The enterprising miller not only grinding cattle meal for the local farmers, but supplying the whole village with electric current at a paltry rate in defiance of the local supply companies. Born of a family of millers, he has taken over the concern in a derelict condition, and the fact that he now was deriving a comfortable livelihood from it refutes the popular conception of the watermill as a picturesque bygone of no practical value. For all its wheels and shafts, anything else like a factory than Minshall Mill would be difficult to imagine. The dim interior was heavy with the inimitable smell of musty sacks and dusk of fresh ground meal, a compound that is incense to the imagination. Like the rime of an autumn frost, the flour had whitened the cobwebs which hung from the rafters, and the hands of generations of millers had polished the woodwork of bins and traps to a smooth, honeycombed bloom, in fact a honey-coloured bloom. From beneath the floor, the water boiling under the mill wheels made distant thunder, a deep undercurrent of sound, to which were added the rumble of the stones and the subdued clatter of the gearing. This was the ancient voice of the mill. No high-pitched, distracting clamour, but a smoothing rhythm, as measured and purposeful and tireless and enduring as the cycle of the seasons. The miller remains as close to the heart of essential things as the ploughman with his team or the shepherd at watch over his flocks. Sadly, not for much longer in the time he was writing this. They were all to go probably within 10 years. A breakdown of this machinery was practically unknown. Not a breakdown, but a breakdown. You know what I mean? A breakdown. I know what I'm talking about. A breakdown of this machinery was practically unknown, although it had been running for centuries. The two undershot water wheels had not needed repair within living memory. They were 15 feet in diameter, their naves formed of the trunks of well-grown oak trees with the bark still upon them. The gearing was paired, wood meshed into iron, the best combination for silence and durability. But in the rare event of a tooth breaking, the miller sent for the millwright from the potteries, who had not forgotten the art of shaping a new tooth, mortising and pegging it into place. Crabapple, the magic wood of the Druids, has been found to be the most suitable for this purpose, and the miller of Minshall kept some by him in case of need. In medieval times, and before the enclosures destroyed the truly socialistic character of the village community, the miller was paid in kind, claiming his portion or knaveship with a measure called a toll dish. In this connection, Messrs. Hopkins and Freese, in their book on the English windmill, quoted the following extract from the Red Paper Book of Colchester. First, the size of the miller is that he have no measure at, I don't know why I'm doing it in a West Country accent, seeing as it's supposed to be in Colchester, but anyway. First, the size of the miller is that he have no measure at his mill, but it be sized and sealed, this is in Old English, so I'm struggling to read it, according to the king's standard, and to have in every bushel of wheat a quart for the grinding, and if he fetch it another quart for the fetting, and of every bushel malt a pint for the grinding, and if he fet it another for fetting. No idea. I wish they would just write that in English and then let you just work it out, be able to read it, rather than putting it in Old English where you've got to transpose all the Y's into I's and work it all out. Monetary payments, because we've been spoilt with having a standard spelling for everything, I suppose. Monetary payment was substituted by the Act of George III, and now the country miller seldom or never grinds corn at all, though there can be no comparison in nourishment value between the old stone-ground flour and the devilised white flour produced by the modern roller mill. From the same authority on early mills come the remarks on the process of stone grinding by a veteran miller. In the so-called old processes, he says, which every miller knows in his heart to be the only real processes, the grain is dropped through a hole in the centre of the upper stone. The millstones are dressed diagonally, the effect being to grind the wheat in a circular movement converging towards the centre, and the germ of the grain, a tiny nut which is oily and greasy, is dusted and pulverised by the dry stone into part of the flour from which it cannot separate. This flour, which is swept from the outer side of the stones into a trough which runs round the mill, is the real wholemeal flour. It is afterwards dressed through silks to remove the bran, thus leaving white flour, in colour a light cream. The old despised windmills and watermills gave people the very best flour attainable, and it is 1,000 pities that they are not used today. I wonder how true that is, actually. That would be interesting to know how true that is. If ever a revival of public taste demanded stone-ground flour, Minshall Mill could supply it. The redressing and the setting of the stones, French burrs for corn, peaks for other grains, being the only alteration necessary. At present, however, we give our cattle the benefit of a process we deny to ourselves, and if we do not soon mend our ways, there will be no millers left to dress a stone for wheat. The road down to the mill was set with cobbles, so fine that it resembled a shingle beach. Not a great while ago, we were told, these extended the length of the village street, while in the broad space before the smithy, at the meeting of two ways, there was a green where stood a solitary tree, its bole circled by a wooden bench. One can only imagine the children at play and the old men sitting at ease in the evening sun, for now all has been swept away by a tide of black tar macadam, checkered in painted lines and symbols. To see it made me more than ever thankful that we had chosen to travel on the only roads in England which are beyond the power of the county councils to deface. It was this funeral road alone that brought the 20th century to Church Minshall, for at night, when the street was dark and still, the village was ageless. Only immemorial country sounds did not break. Only immemorial country sounds did not break, but continued to the silence. A cow mooing in her stall, a sharp bark of a fox or a cry of an owl from the hanging coverts above the river, and the murmur of the weir by the mill, an almost imperceptible rumour of sound. I love that, an almost imperceptible rumour of sound. Could he return at such a time, old Thomas Dam? Could he return at such a time, old Thomas Dam would feel no stranger here. How lovely and how sad. It is sad. I think the saddest thing about reading this book is this is 80 years ago, and he's noting the demise of these things, and here we are living with this demise of these things, and the places he's gone, and we sort of kind of know what he means, and we know what we've lost. It's very sad. I don't think we have learned that much over the 80 years somehow. No, I don't think we have. It's interesting what he was saying about the flower. He was a very enlightened young man, wasn't he, old Rolt, when he wrote this, and incredibly gifted at writing. So now this is part 3 of the book. Part 1 was the construction. Part 2 was his first part of the journey, I guess. Part 3 is, I don't know if there's any more than 3 parts to this. He's at Nantwich, which is a longer chapter, but we will give it a read. Good morning from the west coast of the US. Good morning to you, John Buck. Oh, good morning to Rita, by the way. Good morning to Ed. Oh, good afternoon. Even afternoon, Andy. Hello to Judith. Part 3, Chapter 26, Nantwich. Our stay at Church Minshall was so prolonged that when we finally decided to cast off once more, autumn was already far advanced. We had thought of voyaging up the Welsh Canal to Llangollen, but the outbreak of war and the prospect of winter's imminence brought about a change of plan, and we decided instead to turn south along a different route, with Oxford our ultimate objective. Owing to the high cost of petrol and the difficulty of obtaining supplies, I decided to adapt Cressy's engines to burn paraffin, and our departure was further delayed because the railway company, characteristically, lost the case of vital parts. It should have arrived at Crewe, but after a fortnight of vain telephone conversations with helpless or apathetic clerks, it was eventually run to earth at Wolston, a sleepy country station some miles in the opposite direction. We spent 3 days fitting the new parts, filling tanks with fuel and laying in copious stores, before, on a Saturday at noon, we slipped our moorings, looking our last on the village we had come to regard with familiarity of home. The day was fine and sunny, but a cold westerly breeze was blowing the leaves from the trees and ruffling the surface of the water into wavelets which slapped and gurgled around our bows. Crossing the exposed bank above the river, it was difficult to prevent Cressy from being blown onto the mud, but we succeeded in reaching the sheltered cutting under Old Hallgrave Bridge without having to resort to our shafts. For in common with the rest of the Shropshire Union Canal, the apparent width of the Middlewich Canal was very deceptive, the available draught of water being very small, and any departure from the narrow central channel scored by passing boats landed the unfamiliar firmly and almost inextricably aground. Because of the low banks and these shallow margins, the canal was a favoured haunt of herons. Often, when walking along the towing path, we'd seen them, but could never approach them closely. Invariably, they would wheel away, keeping their distance of 200 or 300 yards. Soon after we had passed through Minshall Lock and crossed the Weaver by a lofty aqueduct, we sighted a heron, and were surprised to discover that, when approached by water, he exhibited no sign of shyness. Instead, he remained motionless on the margin, his long neck craning over the water, until our bows, our bows, rather. I slipped an L in there where I shouldn't have done. Our bows were almost abreast of him, when, quicker than thought, he struck. The long bill flashed down to emerge with a withering silver fish securely held. So close were we by this time that we could see his neck distend as he swallowed his prey. When he rose, it was only to alight 100 yards further ahead and repeat his tactics. Always he landed some little distance from the water's edge, approaching to peer over the brink with all the infinite stealth and concentration of an ardent dry-fly fisherman stalking his gut-shy quarry on a clear chalk stream. Sometimes he drew blank and flew his head without striking, but when he struck, he never failed. This systematic fishing went on for some time until we neared the next lock at Cholmondeston, which was evidently the boundary of his beat, for he winged away over the fields to alight some distance astern. Though we had seen many herons on our summer journey, they had always given us a wide berth, yet this was destined to be not only to be the first, but many of similar encounters on our return. We concluded that the reason for this must be that fish tend to lie on the bottom as winter approaches, and that the passage of a boat creates a disturbance among them which herons find very welcome. Cholmondeston, a name that I'm sure I've mispronounced, was a good example of the way in which local place names can defeat the stranger by their unexpected pronunciation. Ha! How about that? I think it's pronounced Triglothlon. Oh, you're talking about Llangollen, are you? Triglothlon? Yes. Well, I'm just trying to conquer this Trimondeston. That's not what you're talking about, is it? Anyway, yes, a good example. It's a place they just defeat the stranger by unexpected pronunciations. I felt tolerably certain that it would be abbreviated to Chumston, until I was enlightened by an old canal lengthman at Nantwich, who not only pronounced it phonetically, but threw in yet another syllable, and stressed the last but one, in such a manner that the ponderous word assumed the forcefulness of a rousing medieval oath. I was born at Choldermondeston Way. Choldermondeston, I don't know if I've got that right, was what he said, and he should know. Anyway, Cholmondeston. 20 minutes more running brought us in sight of the Jolly Tar at Barbridge, whose windows command the junction of the Middlewich branch with the Oldchester Canal section of the Shropshire Union main line. Here we turned southward to moor for the night between the old warehouse spanning the waterway from bank to bank and a wooden mission room on the water's edge. We wondered whether the latter was intended for canal boatmen on the lines of the Seaman's Mission, as its site suggested, But when a service was held there the next morning, the canal folk were conspicuous by their absence, although several boats passed by. There is a considerable traffic on this motorway, consisting mainly of Thomas Clayton horseboats working between Birmingham and Ellesmere Port, and an occasional Josher or Cowburn and Cowpar motorboats trading from Wolverhampton to Widnes, Runcorn or Manchester via the Middlewich branch. The latter once travelled via the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal to the Trent and Mersey at Great Harwood, but owing to delay at Castle Tunnel and the heavy Cheshire locks, the Shropshire route, 5 minutes shorter, was considerably easier and came to be adopted. At Hurlston, the mouth of the Welsh Canal climbing westwards towards the Marches was a sore temptation, but we passed by it and soon came in sight of the fine sandstone tower of Acton Church, a prominent landmark on the summit of the gentle slope overlooking Nantwich. The old local saying maintains that Acton churchyard is higher than Nantwich steeple. Whether this is true or not matters little, but it is a record fact that Acton was once the mother church of Nantwich and the first place of worship at Witch Malbank, as it was then called, being a diminutive Norman chapel of ease. Until it became part of a through route by the construction of Telford's Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal, the old Chester navigation terminated in a broad basin between Acton and Nantwich, which is still better known as Basin End. Wide boats once traded regularly between Ellesmere Port and the basin, but has now fallen into disuse, the old warehouse having become a store for Cheshire cheeses. A better fate than has befallen most. Acting upon the advice of a lengthman at Barbridge, we tried to moor at this basin, but soon discovered that he had not taken into account the bar of mud thrown across the entrance by the wash of passing motorboats. After we had made 2 abortive attempts, we gave up, mooring outside and walking up the hill to Acton village, where we took a lunch of bread and cheese at the Star, a fine old timbered inn with a mounting block on the cobbles before the door. Because of the interstices of the timber framing, that's a word I struggle with, had been filled with brickwork, it was not a perfect specimen of regional building construction. Nevertheless, it was an attractive example of the roadside hedge tavern. The dark stone-flagged interior was rendered even darker by a typical Victorian stuffiness of wallpaper, aspidistras, lace curtains and coloured lithographs. Yet we felt that even this was preferable to exploitation by the builders of Tudor roadhouses and ye olde worldy tea barns, to whom it might have easily have fallen prey. According to Leyland, there were 400 salt workings in Nantwich at the time of Henry VIII, but their numbers slowly dwindled until, like in the neighbouring Witches, the trade vanished altogether, its only traces being the brine baths and the way in which the subsidence of old workings has caused many houses to sink below street level. 3 times visited by plague, twice laid waste by fire, besieged in the Civil War, the old town now faces a new and more insidious peril, the invasion of the upstart neighbour Crewe, which is threatening to engulf it with a spate of desirable housing estates. Though these have encroached perilously near, Nantwich still contrives to preserve an atmosphere of the old market town, catering solely for the needs of an agricultural district. The existence of Crewe and the strangers at the gates is not yet acknowledged, but how much longer will this happy immunity survive? In view of the recent establishment of a vast new factory at Crewe, it would seem all too probable that it will soon be swallowed up by its swollen neighbour of cinemas, chain stores and sordid streets. Meanwhile, the shops of Nantwich reflect the needs and standard of living of the countrymen for whom they cater. This standard, unlike that of Crewe, is high, a fact that refutes the common belief that it is industrialism which has brought about an improved living. Grocers, bakers and butchers of Nantwich make it abundantly clear to us that the countrymen of Cheshire do not live out of tins and refuse to accept inferior imported foods. To ask a Nantwich butcher for foreign meat would constitute a personal insult, and during the stay in Cheshire we had some home-killed joints that in their tenderness and flavour rivalled the famous roasts of Simpson's on the Strand. We delighted also in sampling the local delicacies, chorley cakes, a currant filled pastry eaten hot with butter, chorley cakes, a currant filled pastry eaten hot with butter, pikelets, a species of crumpet, great oat cakes fried with breakfast bacon, and last by no means, prime Cheshire cheese. This is the only vigorous survivor of that goodly company of English cheeses which have been banished to oblivion, or at best to extreme rarity, by a soap-like factory-produced product wrapped in tinfoil or characterless substance, only fit as bait in mousetraps. The fact that this cheese room still takes its rightful place in the active life of so many farms in the Vale Royal is the highest tribute to the tenacity of traditional rural life in Cheshire. These are the same cheese rooms which, in the 17th century, were exempted from window tax, and the cheesemakers held weekly in Nantwich, where the large barrel-shaped cheeses in their cloth coverings were auctioned, are the direct lineal descendants of the great cheese fairs of a more prosperous past. Originally composed entirely of timber-built houses, it's not surprising that the town was thrice ravaged by fire. That of 1583 was so devastating that Queen Elizabeth came to the rescue of the homeless inhabitants with a grant of timber from her royal forest of Delamere. Her favour is perpetuated to this day by an inscription over the gable of the house in the market square, which runs, "God grant our royal queen in England long to reign, for she hath put her helping hand to build this town again." There are still many excellent examples of timber work in the town, particularly the Old Crown Hotel with its great gallery window extending the whole length of the upper story, and most notable of all, the mansion of Richard Church in Hospital Street. Though very different in style and of a later date, the latter shares the Greville's 14th century house at Camden in Gloucestershire, the distinction of being one of the very few wealthy merchants' houses remaining in England. For the heavy hand of progress has naturally dealt more hardy with the town house of the merchant venturer than with the secluded country manor of the squire or yeoman. Greville's house we read about in J.B. Priestley, you may recall. I've been to Nantwich by mistake twice. I think it's Llangollen. Llangollen. Yes, I think you're right. Goth. Thank you for that. It is pronounced Chumston. Linda Kane says Chalmondeston is Chumston. Yes. It's one of those, isn't it? It's one of those like I can't remember the Leo. It's not Leominster, like Leominster, Leo Minster, Leominster. Church Mason Church's mansion is as fine a flowering of the regional style as is Greville House of the Cotswolds Gothic. The timberwork of the long four-gabled front is most elaborate and finely wrought in a design of linked Maltese crosses, varied by a pattern of alternatively erect and inverted triple branches in the gable heads. Within, we found a wealth of magnificent panelling and carved overmantels, some of which still bear the marks of tallow dips, which must have been ruthlessly struck upon them in the past with singular disregard for the danger of fire. Although we should otherwise have been unable to see the interior, we could not help regretting that the house should have become a tea and antique shop. Nevertheless, we were inclined to a more charitable view when we learnt that the present owners had not only saved the house from the fate of being shipped piecemeal to America, like the Snows Hill smithy, but with their own hands had restored the interior, stripping as many as 20 layers of wallpaper from the panelling. They had also brought the old rooms to life with many beautiful and tastefully chosen things, for which, though they were for sale, they displayed a genuine pride and affection. Notably among these was a superb refectory table, 30 feet long, and bearing a salt mark, which graced the great dining room. They had refused a good offer for this table on learning that the prospective purchaser proposed cutting it in half. The rooms were lit entirely by candles, and the picture we carried with us from Church's mansion was one of the friendly gloom of the panelled dining hall, starred with flickering gracious light shining out from the wall sconces and branch candelabra as the dusk fell. As a permanent dwelling place, I would prefer the stalwart limestones of Greville's house, for walls of timber, lath, and plaster, no matter how truly built, can never afford the same degree of warmth, while searching draughts whistle through ill-fating casements whose frames inevitably distort with age. Nevertheless, had I to live in Cheshire, I would have chosen such a house, for I confess I care little for local sandstone. Of a blackened, sombre quality, unresponsive to light or shadow, it possesses neither the lightness nor the durability of oolithic limestone, which, in its subtle range of colouring, varying from silver to deepest ochre, is the perfect medium for the soaring grace of perpendicular Gothic. Because it is built of this unsympathetic sandstone, which the weather defaces as effectively as any Puritan, I was little moved by the fabric of Nantwich Church, fine though it undoubtedly is. There are some more than usually grotesque gargoyles carved with characteristic vigour and humour, especially one representing a devil of exceptional depravity, bearing off a billowous woman still clinging to her quart pot. There was also a very fine stone pulpit, whose panels and slender pedestal are richly carved in the perpendicular style of double arcading, to harmonise with the low chancel screen from which it springs, with the natural exuberance of a flower. Nevertheless, I saw nothing to change my view that wood and not stone was the chosen medium of the medieval craftsman of Cheshire. For the glory of this church are the canopied choir stalls of the late 15th century workmanship. There are 20 of them, and their delicate open-work canopies, each embracing 3 image niches, spire to the chancel roof, in such a wealth of slender shafts and crocketed pinnacles, that it is through 100 springing fountain jets. That it is as though 100 springing fountain jets had petrified in oak. But it was in the misericords beneath that the craftsman of the age of faith had expressed most exuberantly his medieval fancy. Their carving spoke with the voice of the singers in the Sun Inn at Shardlow, a voice that has been stilled forever by that new spirit of joyless sanctimony which was a product of commercialism. So prodigal is the rich blend of humour, imagination and piety that has found expression here, that the mind shrinks from the contrast of our own impoverishment. Here, wrought with infinite toil and cunning, are knights and dragons, monks, nuns and wrestlers, dolphins, mermaids, strange man-headed birds, and Reynard the fox setting forth on a hunting foray, a leather bottle slung around his waist. These misericords are poetry in oak, for wood and stone were to the medieval craftsman what words are to the poet. When shall we see their like again? And I'm sorry I read that so abysmally. When shall we see their light again? I have no idea. But probably not today. It's 2:40. Yes, that's all right. Let's have a quick look at the where's my mouse? The comments. Sorry, my reading was a bit lame today. Featheringham is pronounced Fenshaw, apparently. Oh, is it? Yes. Featheringham is Fenshaw. It's amazing how these words are so changed. Like how the surname Cholmondeley is pronounced Chumley. Try the Durbit's etiquette guide for some wacky surnames. Oh, yes, that sounds like good. And the dairymaid was 100. Mice don't like cheese, says Michael Angel. Meopham in Kent is Mepham. Misericords are delightful. Brilliant. Oh, is there more? Wait a minute. No, that's it. Perfect timing for kneading your bread. Yes, it does need kneading. I'm so sorry. I will try and do better tomorrow. Apologies for my stumbling utterances today. Some days better than others. It's just the way it goes. But thank you very much for coming along. Fascinating book. And I just think the parallels between him and Priestley about how miserable they see that the new age is become, no matter that things have become easier, reflects very much what I keep burbling, finding myself saying about the modern era. Try pronouncing Whaley Castle. Is it? Turbo Stream. Whaley Castle? Whaley? I have no idea. I need you to put that phonetically. In the meantime, I'll be back at 8 o'clock. I must go and knead my bread. My bread needs me. Thank you very much for coming along. And I'll see you anon, as they say. Anon, anon, anon. These hands must get kneading. Take care. Thanks very much. And ta-ta for now. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.